Thank you for the warm welcome. So I am here to be with you to honor our veterans. And it's such an important day because there's so much about what is on the ballot in 2020 that our veterans have fought for and died for. I do believe that in 2020, the issues that are before us and the fight before us is truly about the identity of who we are as a nation. I really do believe that. I do believe that what is before us and the fight that is before us is about whether we hold true and honor the ideals that were behind the writing of the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and those words we spoke in 1776, that we are all equal and should be treated that way. And it is our veterans who have lived a life of service in honor and defense of those ideals. It is our veterans that we honor today, and by extension, we honor all that they and you were committed to fighting for in terms of the identity and the integrity and the pride that we have in our nation and all that it stands for. So I'm honored to be with you, to celebrate and to honor their service. And thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I do believe that the fight before us is for our identity. I do believe the fight that we're looking at right now is a fight for our rule of law. I do believe the fight before us is for our system of justice and for our democracy. And so the issue then becomes in this campaign, how do we win? Yes. And I say that we win by focusing on the future. Focusing on the issues that impact families today with a solution for tomorrow, agreeing that the solutions from yesterday don't carry over. We need to look at the future. I believe to win, we have to be prepared to say that those powerful forces that have been trying to sow hate and division among us, those people that have been trying to get us to point fingers at each other and turn on each other, that they are not reflective of who we are and what we care about. And so to win, we must be prepared to unify our country, understanding that within the beauty of the diversity of who we are, the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. I do believe that. And I believe to win, we are going to need a nominee on that stage who has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. And Greenwood, you're looking at her. You're looking at her. So I will tell you, my background is I am a daughter of parents who met when they were active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Berkeley and Oakland, California. I grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting for justice. And among the heroes of that movement, many of whom came from South Carolina, among the heroes of that movement were folks like Thurgood Marshall, who understood through the skill of the profession of law how to translate the passion from the streets to the courtrooms of our country and do the work of reminding folks of that promise we articulated in 1776, that we are all equal and should be treated that way. So I decided at a young age I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to Howard University, and then I went back to California for law school. And when I graduated, my family gathered around. My mother, who raised me, and my sister, she said, okay, Kamala, what are you going to do in your fight for justice? And I said, you know, I've decided I'm going to become a prosecutor. Because I believe that this is a system that is supposed to do the work of justice, but all too often has not, and needs to be reformed. And I decided, well, maybe I'll go up the rough side of the mountain, Pastor, to do what is necessary from the inside to effect change. And I also decided I wanted to be in a place where I could stand and be a voice for some of the most voiceless and vulnerable. And so I started my career in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in Oakland, California, the office that Earl Warren once ran. And from the first day I walked into the courtroom, I spoke these 5 words: Kamala Harris, for the people. And that term, for the people, captures our system of justice in 2 important ways. One, we have rightly said, a harm against anyone is a harm against everyone. And that no one should be made to fight alone.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
2, in our system of justice, we have rightly said, and so when I stood there and said for the people, it means all the people, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of the party with which you're registered to vote, regardless of where you live geographically, regardless of the language your grandmother speaks. All the people. And so in the name of the people, when I was a prosecutor, a young prosecutor, I specialized in crimes against women and children, knowing they deserved to have a voice that gave dignity and strength without judgment. For the people, when I was the elected district attorney of San Francisco, becoming the first black woman to be elected a district attorney of any county in a state of 40 million people, it meant going inside and saying, hey, this America's shame of mass incarceration in large part was fueled because of that failed war on drugs. And so I create some of the first in the nation programs around getting jobs for young men arrested for drugs. For the people, when I was elected the Attorney General of California, as the first woman, as the first person of color, representing the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice, meant taking on the 5 big banks of the United States when they were engaged in predatory lending practices that caused people to be foreclosed upon across our country and working families lost their home. It meant taking on one of the biggest for-profit colleges in our nation and getting a $1 billion settlement against them and putting them out of business when they were targeting our veterans to take their money and give them a bogus education that resulted not in a job but debt. For the people, when I joined the United States Senate as the second black woman in the history of the United States Senate to be elected there, has meant taking on Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr and Brett Kavanaugh. And Greenwood, for the people in this election for president means standing here fully prepared to defeat Donald Trump. Yes. Yes. So that's why I'm running for the people. And I do believe justice is on the ballot in 2020. When a father, anywhere in South Carolina or any other state in our union, is sitting at his kitchen table past midnight when everybody else has gone to sleep, works 2 jobs, but not sure how he can get through the end of the month and knows he's paying more taxes than the 400 richest families in America, economic justice is on the ballot. So I'm running for president to put in place what will be the biggest tax cut for middle-class families we've seen in generations. In particular, for families that make less than $100,000 a year, you'll get a tax credit of up to $6,000 a year that you can take home at up to $500 a month. When in America, there is a mother anywhere around this state or our country who calls 911 because her child has an out-of-control fever, and they say, head to the emergency room. So she puts the kids in the back seat, drives to the hospital, sitting in the parking lot, looking at those sliding glass doors of the emergency room, but don't want to walk in, because even though she's got insurance, She knows if she walks through those sliding glass doors, she'll be out of pocket $1,000 to $4,000 deductible. Healthcare justice is on the ballot in 2020. So I'm running for president to put in place a Medicare for All plan, which means everyone will be covered, including people with pre-existing conditions, which means that Medicare will be extended to cover vision and dental and hearing aids, which means we'll also bring down the cost because we will get rid of co-pays and deductibles. And now here, Greenwood, is the difference between my plan and some of the other folks on the debate stage. I'm not trying to get rid of private insurance. So I heard from too many folks who said, Kamala, don't take away our choice. We want the choice between a private plan or a public plan. Well, my plan will give you the choice that you deserve. For the people means recognizing that here in South Carolina, over 5,000 teachers left the profession last year because here, like in other states around the country, teachers are working 2 and 3 jobs. 94% of our public school teachers come out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. Teachers on average make 11% less than similarly educated professionals. Do you know, I know you know, if a black child has had a black teacher before the end of 3rd grade, they're 13% more likely to go to college. If that child has had 2 black teachers before the end of 3rd grade, they're 32% more likely to go to college. But yet our black students also come up with the highest level of student loan debt, which is a real barrier to them joining a profession for which they have a passion. Education justice is on the ballot. So I'm running to put in place what will be the first in our nation's history federal investment in closing the teacher pay gap, which on average is $13,500 a year. And let's be clear. In most places in our country, $13,500 a year, that's a year's worth of mortgage payments. Right? That's a year's worth of grocery bills. That's putting a significant dent in student loan debt, which is one of the greatest barriers to our students coming out and joining a profession for which they have a calling. When in America, our babies, and let me just be clear about one thing. I was raised in a community where the children of the community were the children of the community. I mean, literally, where if you did something down the street, by the time you got home, your mama knew about it, right? So here's why I say, when our babies, elementary, middle, and high school students are going to school to endure a drill during which they're taught about how to hide in a closet in the event there's a mass shooter roaming the hallways of their school, justice for our children is on the ballot. Yeah. And they're being traumatized. They're being traumatized. So I'm running for president to say, look, on this subject, let me just tell you in terms of my background. I have hugged more mothers of homicide victims than I care to tell you. I have seen more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. This is a real issue. Gun violence is the leading cause of death of black men, young black men in America, more than the other 9 combined. So I'm running for president to say it's about time people in Washington, D.C. have the courage to reject a false choice which suggests you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. I support the Second Amendment. But we need reasonable gun safety laws, including universal background checks and a renewal of the assault weapons ban. So I'm running for president to say, look, I'm prepared, if necessary, and this is a point of distinction between me and some of my friends on that debate stage. I'm prepared to take executive action, if necessary, to put in place background checks, and to have the courage to take on the gun lobby when it comes to something that is so fundamental around the safety and security of our schools and our neighborhoods and our country. And I can go on and on down the list about why I do believe justice is on the ballot, but one of the things that I think is most apparent about why justice is on the ballot in 2020 is we know when we have a criminal living in the White House, justice is on the ballot. And let's all agree, in a democracy that respects the rule of law and honors a system of justice, then we rightly say no one is above the law, including the President of the United States. And here's the bottom line, Greenwood. I deeply and truly believe that when we overcome these various injustices, I do believe that will be the moment at which we have the potential to truly unlock the promise of America and the potential of the American people. And that's the America I see. I know that's the America so many of you have fought for. It's the America we believe in. It's an America where we know we have the ability to be, if we are true to all that we say we are, in terms of our ideals, our values, what we know to be morally right. And so that's why I'm running for president. And I'm just going to share with you one last thing, and then I would love to start our conversation. I've been in this election now, this campaign, 10 months. So I'm at the point, Senator, where I'm all about real talk, right? Like, just don't want to waste anybody's time, right? You got other things you could be doing with your time right now. So I just want to have a brief conversation about something that's been coming up in connection with the campaign that I call the elephant in the room. But really it's the donkey in the room. And it's this conversation about electability. And the conversation goes something like this. Well, I don't know if America is ready for a woman of color to be president of the United States. The conversation goes, I appreciate you, brother. The conversation goes something like this. Well, I know I'm ready, but I don't know if my neighbors are ready. They'll say, well, maybe it's not your turn. Well, maybe it's not your time. Oh, it's going to be so difficult. Well, I'm here to share with you guys. This is not a new conversation for me. In fact, this is a conversation I have heard in every campaign I have. And now here is the operative word, won. Every time. And I share this with you, not to say anything about me, but to say everything about you and who we are as the American people. Because you see, we have the ability to believe in what is possible even when we've not seen it before. We have the ability to believe and have faith in what can be, unburdened by what has been. And we, by our character and nature, know there is nothing we have achieved as a nation that has been about progress, be that social justice, civil rights, the fight for equality. Nothing we have achieved that has been about progress came without a fight. We're up for a good fight. We like a good fight. And it is also our nature to know that to achieve what we know is possible, We can never afford to sit back and wait for somebody else's permission to tell us what is possible. Right? You know that. So that's where we are today, Greenwood. And I cannot thank you all enough, because this is about the America we believe in, an America where everybody has health care, an America where our babies go to school and feel safe, an America where we agree nobody should have to work more than one job to have a roof over their head and food on the table. And an America, and this is what our veterans have fought for, and an America where we know and we will get to the place where we greet a stranger and in their face see a neighbor. That's what we're fighting for. All right. There we go. So with that, we're going to begin our discussion. And Deitra Matthews is going to moderate our discussion.
I'm going to try.
A great spouse of a man who served and has served very nobly and well.
Thank you for saying that, Senator. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of our veterans. Thank you so very much for your service. Good afternoon to all of our active military servicemen and women in South Carolina. Good afternoon. And on behalf of all the military spouses in the room, because I am a military spouse and I find myself serving too, yes. Welcome. And thank you, too, for your service. Really briefly, before we get into our conversation, Senator, I would really like to share why I support Senator Harris. I actually discovered Senator Harris in 2013. 2013, this little girl from South Carolina, or this little woman from South Carolina in 2013. And I kind of fell down the rabbit hole from a Google research. And I remember thinking, like, who is this brilliant woman in California? Oh my gosh, this is 2013. Most of the country did not know who Kamala Harris was, but I did in 2013. And in 2015, I found myself have fallen down a rabbit hole again, and I discovered all of the work she'd done for our service members. Yeah. Now, I've been married for almost 18 years, and we've been at war my entire marriage. I haven't even celebrated my wedding anniversary 5 times. My babies, my daughters, have missed 3 Christmases with their dad. So in 2015, when I saw this brilliant woman again fighting for our service members, fighting against the Corinthian colleges, fighting against our predatory lenders, and I'll be honest with you, my husband and I witnessed a service member be deployed for a year, come back with a little bit of money. He goes out and he buys a vehicle with balloon payments. And we saw him. We watched that truck sit there for 2 weeks, and we didn't know why. And then we learned he didn't have any money to put gas in the car. He didn't have any money to put gas in the truck. But Senator Harris was fighting, and she led the charge with other state attorney generals around our nation to protect our service members. So this is not a presidential candidate, you all, who is talking about what she's going to do. This is someone who has been in the fight for us for a very long time. And as a military spouse, I mean it. I have gone, this will be my 3rd presidential election. Senator, I need someone I can trust. I need someone I can trust, because when I send my husband away to these foreign lands, I need someone I can trust. I trust you. And I really, if you're not decided now, I really want you to really think about that. Trust. I can trust her. We can trust her. We can trust her. So thank you, Senator Harris, for coming to Greenwood, South Carolina.
Amen.
So you all are going to have the opportunity to join us in our conversation. So we'll just get started with some of our personal stories, Senator, and they have a few questions that they would like to ask you. Mr. Lewis, if you don't mind starting.
Good evening, Senator. And my name is Charles Lewis. I'm the chair of the Greenwood County Democratic Party. And on their behalf, I want to welcome you to Greenwood. Thank you for coming to our little town here. I have a personal question that I just wanted to ask you, and hopefully that you'll be able to, when you're president, make a difference. And of course, it's about veterans. It's I have a dual retirement system from where I retired from state law enforcement and retired 23 years, from Army Guard. And I needed to lean on my veterans organization to find my military records. And of course, they have to go to St. Louis. And for 2 years, they tried to find my records before they could service me. And I finally got a letter that says, if you can find them from St. Louis. And so I had to take it into my own hands, and I called the Adjutant General's office in Columbia, who gave me the number of the warehouse that houses records. And the young lady that was there was very helpful. She found my records, and she sent me a CD of my military records. And it's just that's just one story of many I'm sure you've heard, that we need to really do something in the VA. Yep. What is your plan for PTSD, the different things that the military challenges that we have?
Right, and I'm honored that you're here, and thank you for your service. And I just, if you don't mind, let me also say one thing, that I know so many who have served our country are tired of hearing thank you for your service. Because, sadly, it starts with thank, it ends with service, and then the conversation ends completely. It's over. Instead of truly thanking you through deeds, not words. And so I've heard this story so many times. And for those who are not familiar, when our men and women are in service, it's a tight system. Paperwork follows everybody immediately. When it's time to be deployed, you will be found. And everyone will know everything about you. Everything. During the course of service, precision. These are all the reasons why we should respect the strength of America's military. It's a very precise, tight system. And then you get discharged. And all of a sudden you become anonymous. This is what happens every day. All of a sudden it's, who are you? And so it relates to your history of service, it relates to your medical records, and it goes on and on and on. So, one, in terms of strengthening the VA, it's a very big part of my plan of action. Unlike this current administration that is trying to privatize so much and give out contracts to, Donald Trump's friends at Mar-a-Lago, right? I'm all about recognizing that the VA, the beauty of the design of the VA is to recognize that when people have gone through a life of service in the way that our veterans have, they need to be able to go to a safe place to get the treatment, to get the advice, to get the counseling they need. Because it's a very specific experience they've had. And they need to be able to go somewhere that they will not be, and that they will be understood, and that they feel safe. So that's a big part of why I support the VA and its mission, but I also know that there is a whole bureaucracy there that we need to cut through to actually be able to have it perform its mission, including put more resources into staffing up the VA with mental health service, with physical health service. And then also we need to do a much better job of transitioning people when they're discharged back into their homes and their communities. My design for it is that literally weeks before discharge, that's when the conversation starts. Which is to say, when you get out, this is how it's going to be. So one, just an orientation. It's no longer going to be regimented, where you eat, you wake up at this time, you eat at this time. These are the places you go. Like that, you have to realize that's part of what needs to happen. Part of what needs to happen for military spouses. I've talked to so many military spouses, in particular whose spouse has been in a combat zone, whether actually in combat or not. Well, they normally come back. It is predictable. Having had experiences of seeing things that most people have not seen, experiencing things most people have not experienced, and we don't even talk to the spouses to say, this is what you should expect when they come back. Because remember, and again, this is about understanding what we're talking about. When the spouse who has served comes home, they're not of a nature or character to ask for help or tell anybody what might be their source of pain or hurt. Because part of the nature of our men and women who serve is, even if they are wounded, to say, oh, don't help me, that person needs help more than I do. That's their nature. And then when they come out, if we have a system that says, oh, they should be getting help, no, they're not going to do that naturally necessarily. And so we have to recognize that and help them transition, and help also their spouses recognize what's happening so that we can have an orderly and a smoother transition. The other thing that I'll say is that we also have to recognize that so many people who go into service go because they are patriots, love our country, but also because there are certain opportunities that our military can provide for people that otherwise they will not have access to. Training and things where they can acquire a skill. And that's kind of the promise also that we make to people who enlist. That you will acquire a skill so that when you, after you have served, you go back, that it will transition into something. But we don't keep that promise then. And that's another big part of then the experience that folks have when they come out. So this, this is the totality of how I see it, and we can get into the details. But the issue of the records is ridiculous, and it's just it is irresponsible, and wrong, because of course, if you have the resources to do what you did, meaning just the resources to figure it out, but if you don't, because you've just served, then we know how the story ends in different ways. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Senator. I've actually noticed, not just in Senator Harris's veteran and military family plan, most, if not all, of her plans address mental health. Yeah. And so with that being said, I would like for Chantel to really speak a little bit about coming in as a 17-year-old and deciding to serve our country at 17 years old. I remember a few years ago we not celebrated, but we experienced a 1,000-year flood. Remember that? And I remember watching all of our elected leaders, work around the clock for all of those days, and I felt so bad for them. But then I immediately thought about a Chantel, who at 17 years old has to experience being at that kind of alertness at 17 years old, and then they're having to do it 6 days a week for 200 days straight. So I think about Chantel at 17 years old having that burden. And so Chantel, can you share a little bit about that?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
My name is Chantel Smith. I'm not 17 anymore, unfortunately, but thank you. I joined the United States Air Force at 17. My parents had me emancipated so that I could follow my decision, for better or for worse. I had a couple of questions for you based on younger veterans, because what you're seeing less and less of is people who are staying in the military till retirement. Yeah. And with that comes the burden of coming home and, as you said, not having skill sets that translate to jobs in America, or you find yourself what I did. So in January of this year, I came back from Afghanistan, I spent 366 days in a war zone as a contractor. It was intense. It was much more intense for me as a full-grown adult than it was when I was 17, 18, 19 serving in the Air Force. And what I found was there are opportunities there in contract work for veterans.
Right.
But I had a specific question for you about that, and I wrote it down because I'm not good off the top. So government contracting is a lucrative and sustainable avenue for growth for small businesses owned by veterans and minorities. In recent years, the uncovering of fraud, waste, and abuse practices by large corporations has resulted in unfair and unethical practices, making it difficult for small businesses to compete. How will your administration address this inequality and rein in the abuse of this system? And you spoke a little bit about that with Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago. So, yes,
but that's an excellent point that you raised. Right, so it has to be about, one, doing a real audit of where folks' tax dollars are going, right? And recognizing the waste and abuse. And also, to the point of your question, recognizing that there are small women, minority-owned businesses that are doing very important and good work and thriving and supporting those. And so, it is just a matter of paying attention. And there is so much that happens around waste of military funding. And that's one of my areas of focus, because here's the thing. That funding that is being wasted can go to the VA. That funding that is being wasted can go into better transition programs to help people transition with the skills they've acquired in the military to the jobs of the 21st century that need to be filled. And so it's a matter of not just giving lip service. This is what, look, I'm about real talk, like I said. We can't just talk about veterans on Veterans Day. It's got to be every day. It's got to be every day. And I think that there is a tendency to just say, okay, just as long as nothing bad happens over there, just let that be, instead of understanding there is incredible neglect that has happened over a period of time. We can't just use people up. And in particular in these endless wars that we need to end. And so there's a part of my program that also goes to tax credits for training. So an $8,000 tax credit for folks that need to transition into a new type of job. And that will cover not only the cost of training, but also childcare and transportation. And that is a big part of it. But we have to recognize that the way that we have been spending on the military, it has not been smart in terms of the distribution of those resources. And in particular, again, the neglect of our veterans. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Jones is actually a longtime business owner here in Greenwood, South Carolina. And because of that, he actually has had the opportunity to have many, many relationships with local leaders here and other community leaders here. But he actually has a question about some of those challenges that he hears in his neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm George Jones, and I transportation business, been in business a few years here in Greenwood. So I get a chance to communicate with a whole lot of different peoples and see things and hear things, what's going around Greenwood. We have a nice community here.
Yeah.
We really do. We have some problems, but, like anywhere else, we have to deal with them, work with them. And I just want to, I know you probably heard it, but the need that our people, I know today is Veterans Day. I thank God he let me serve. But we have other days outside of just one day, Veterans Day.
Right.
So we are desperate in need of housing, not only for our veterans, for other elderly people.
Yes.
And it's done got so bad now in the big cities like Greensville, Columbia, they are sending people out of the area here in Greenwood to live, to get housing. That's how bad it is over the state of South Carolina.
Yeah.
So we need to be concerned, and I guess you all know that we are one of the main filter houses now for these people that's been on drugs. We have so many houses here, neighbors, you might not even know it, in your neighborhood that's living there now. So we are really, they said economy is good, but I don't see where it's good right in our area.
Yeah.
I really don't. So I know that you're going to make a difference. You have our support. You have my support. I can't speak for nobody else. But I'm quite sure you have community support too.
Thank you, sir.
But I just want to say, hold your head up, keep pushing.
Yes, sir.
Because everything I've ever got in life, I had to fight and take it.
I know that's right.
And I'm still fighting and taking it today.
Yes.
So I thank you.
Oh, I'm honored you're a part of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So, thank you, and I cannot thank you enough. So, affordable housing, to your point, is probably one of the biggest and under-discussed issues challenging our country today. And so, obviously, here in Greenwood. So, I have a $135 billion federal investment in local communities around affordable housing. And it includes not only what we need to do around basically encouraging local development as opposed to putting, like the Donald Trump putting the money in the back pockets of big developers. It's about supporting the need to also develop the skills for the local folks to actually help build the housing. It is about also rent relief. So for families that are paying more than 30% of their income in rent plus utilities, they get a tax credit of up to $6,000 a year. And building affordable housing. And also dealing with, to your point, what we need to do around substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, all of which play in that same space. But the affordable housing issue is a big one. There is also an issue that is about the fact that over a long period of time in our country, especially around redlining, which has happened here in South Carolina, there's so many families that historically were not allowed to buy homes in neighborhoods where the value of that home would appreciate. So I also have a plan that's about looking at what we need to do to encourage home ownership, in particular around families that are living in historically redlined communities and families that are living in federally subsidized housing, to create federal grants around down payments and closing costs for home ownership. Because if you want to look at what we can do to really uplift them and create a middle class, investing in families' ability to have homes and own homes is one of the smartest and most effective ways to do that. So that is a large part of how I look at what we need to do to actually really reverse course around what have been rules that have been written in favor of the top 1% and the big corporations, and look instead about what we need to do to uplift working families in America. And a big part of it is through home ownership. Thank you.
Does that mean firing Ben Carson?
Oh yes, I'm gonna look there. Let me just tell you, with your help, Greenwood, we are getting elected, and I'm gonna just with extreme joy, say thank you for your service and goodbye to so many people, Mr. Carson, Mr. Voss. Just thank you and goodbye. Yes.
Appreciate that honesty.
Oh, yes, with joy.
Mr. Lewis, with your being a leader here in Greenwood, South Carolina, would you like to share any other concerns or challenges that you actually hear here in Greenwood, South Carolina?
Well, you said firing Ms. DeBoss. I think that would be one place to start, because Greenwood, I just attended a District 50, School District 50 meeting at the Chamber a week or so ago, and the superintendent was talking about the challenges that District 50 has to get the test scores up of our children. And we're looking at, they're looking at maybe doing year-round school to where they have 9 weeks and then 2 weeks of remedial for the kids that are having some issues, and et cetera, et cetera. I know another issue is the gun violence.
Yeah.
It has not skipped us here in Greenwood. And I know that's because the NRA is running rogue right now, and our president is allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
So Greenwood is suffering from that. Greenwood is suffering from affordable housing. There is a district that is represented by a Republican, which we're hoping to change here in Greenwood, hopefully come 2020. Our issues in Greenwood, even though we're a small town, are really not that much different from probably what you hear across the country in California and some of the bigger states.
Yeah.
So,
I can talk a little bit about that.
yes, thank you.
So of the various candidates, I think one of two. Mary Ann Williamson also has a children's agenda. I have a children's agenda, and I invite you to see it. Even when I was Attorney General of California, running the Department of Justice there, I realized that there was no state agency that concerned itself with children. And so I created the Bureau of Children's Justice. Now, this was years and years ago, before I ever thought about running for president, before I was even in the Senate. So this is a long-standing area of focus for me. So my agenda as president for our children relate to a number of things. One, around what I said earlier about teacher pay and increasing teacher pay. The other is around having a nurse and a social worker in every school. Another is around affordable child care. No family should have to spend more than 7% of their income in child support, in child care. Because this is a big issue. Child care is in many places now more expensive than college tuition. And working families cannot afford to, this literally they have to make a decision about whether we work and pay the bills or pay for child care, because child care can often be more expensive than their take-home pay. So we're setting families up for failure. Another part of this is what we need to do around, to your point, dealing with childhood trauma. Now, this is an area I've worked on for years. Children who are growing up in a neighborhood where there's violence, in a home where there's violence, or in poverty, because let's be clear, poverty is trauma-inducing. But we are not doing anything about diagnosing and treating it. So there's a big part of my plan that is about my health care plan that is about addressing childhood trauma. Because unaddressed, it leads to all kinds of predictable behaviors that end up having people say that's the bad child. That's the child who doesn't pay attention. That's the child, right, and literally it's because they are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. They're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a large part of that that's about funding. And then I'll also say as a general matter, and this relates to part of the challenges around that we need to meet for our veterans, and that's mental health care. So let's talk about that for a moment. Mental health care, the failure to fund mental health care in America, I believe is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, public policy failures in America. It really is. Because here's the thing, when we talk about health care, we are talking about the body from the neck down. Instead of understanding health care from the neck up is as important, if not more. But we have stigmatized it. We overlook it, maybe because, a broken arm, you can see that cast, right? And so what is happening in America is people are silently suffering from depression, from drug addiction, from suicidal thoughts. And we are not putting the resources into saying, one, you do not have to silently suffer. We're going to bring it out of the shadows, out of the closet. We are going to treat it and think of it as any other kind of health care issue that needs to be addressed. So when we're talking about our babies who are growing up in communities where there's violence and gun violence, a lot of how I think about it is not only what we need to do to stop the violence, but what we need to do to treat the children. in a way that recognizes the trauma that is resulting from that. So, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator. We're going to now have, I'd say, one of the hardest political directors I have ever seen. Oh, okay, we're good. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't see with the light. Well, with that said, when you're talking about mental health, Senator, in 2009, my husband deployed to Afghanistan 3 weeks after my baby was born, Claudia. You've met Claudia.
Yes, of course I have.
And I actually discovered myself in a bathroom in the middle of the night. It was dark. I was crying because I had a crying baby. Yeah. My older daughter, who is 3, as you know, was born with spina bifida, hydrocephalus, has had 9 surgeries, 2 of them being brain surgeries. One was to repair spontaneous brain hemorrhage. And I discovered myself suffering silently.
Yeah.
Because at that time, it was taboo for a military spouse to go to the military leaders to say, I am in pain, I'm suffering. And so people like me in the military spouses are often called the uncounted.
Yes.
We have 22 service members who are committing suicide or veterans every single day.
Yes.
But some of our military spouses are making a permanent decision for temporary circumstance too.
Yeah.
And had it not been for my getting on that phone in the middle of the night, in that dark bathroom, calling that 1-800 number, by the grace of God, I am here today.
Yes.
So I really do appreciate your work. But if you can really go further and speak about how you're going to kind of relieve some of the burdens of our military spouses,
Yes,
because in your plan you actually talk about spousal employment,
Yes.
and that's really, really big, and that is a heavy burden that many military families carry.
Yes. You want to answer?
I just want to add
absolutely.
something to
Sure,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I didn't have a military spouse when I joined the military, but my parents suffered a great deal. I was 17 the first time I touched down in Iraq, and it wasn't until I was in my mid-30s that my mom came to me and said, you know, I thought my daughter was going to die, and I didn't know who I could ask that question to. Is my daughter going to die? What do I do if my daughter dies? She said the VA doesn't reach out until they want to give you a folded flag. So along with that spouse, there are entire military families who are affected by the decision to join. And if you could speep to that in addition to the spouses.
That's such an important point you're making. That's such an important point, especially because there are some. Look, and I'd say this in a respectful way, not condescending, but we have babies going into our military.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
we
right.
We really do.
Yeah.
You know, when people are living in a certain circumstance and they go to college, right? They're 18 through 24. We call them college kids.
Right.
Knowing that's the very phase of life, right?
Absolutely.
That is still very much about active development and growth and youth. And but when they're in certain other systems, we just write them off as adults who can, you know, deal with it and handle it, and then to your point, and then not think about their parents as well. So there is a large part of my design for what we need to do to fix things that is about families, with an emphasis on spouses. I'd love to talk with you more about also taking a look at what we're doing about parents as a specific matter, as opposed to thinking about it just as an extension of families, because to your point, that's also a specific need when we're talking about parents. But the spouses piece is, you know, I've heard so many stories. I have visited with military spouses, you and I have talked, and the issues are extensive, including, for example, employment, which is that the families move so much. And so if the spouse is a teacher or an accountant or something that requires a certificate from the state for employment, and then they move, they can't work in the new place. So part of my plan is that there is an exemption for military spouses around certificates, so that the certificate will be honored in